Commander Quan Ho stood on the bridge of his ship, the Silent Talon, watching the big screen in front of him. His green, scaly skin caught the orange light from the control panels as he stared at something that made his stomach feel sick with worry. Out there in the cold, empty space was a human warship, just floating around like a dead fish. The ship looked old and beaten up. Its metal sides were covered in scars and burn marks from some long-ago battle. It had been drifting out here for 300 years, or at least that's what their computers said. Nobody had seen or heard from humans in all that time. Most people thought they were all dead and gone. Ye Jin, his navigation officer, walked up beside him. Her purple eyes were wide with concern as she looked at the readings on her tablet. She was one of the few crew members who actually paid attention to details instead of just following orders blindly. "Commander," she said in a quiet voice, "I really think we should stay away from that thing. The energy readings I'm getting don't make sense. Something's not right about it." Quan Ho turned to look at her and made a dismissive gesture with his clawed hand. He had been in the military for 40 years and had never met a human who could challenge Zephyrian technology. In his mind, humans were just simple creatures who barely knew how to build proper spaceships. "Don't be ridiculous, Ye Jin," he said with a laugh that sounded more nervous than confident. "Humans are nothing but primitives who got lucky a few times. Their technology is like children's toys compared to ours. We have nothing to fear from a dead ship that's been floating around for centuries." But even as he said this, something deep in his gut told him that maybe his navigation officer was right to be worried. The ship out there didn't look quite as dead as it should. There was something about the way it sat in space, like a sleeping predator that might wake up at any moment. Boram, the science officer, was hunched over his control station, his 6 fingers dancing across the holographic interface. He was young, for his position, only about 30 years old, but he was the smartest person on the ship when it came to analyzing alien technology. "Sir," Boram called out, "should I start the deep scan? I have to warn you, if there's any active systems on that ship, our scan might wake them up." Quan Ho felt a flash of anger at being questioned by his own crew. He was the commander here, and he had fought in more battles than these youngsters had even heard about. No ancient human technology was going to make him look like a coward in front of his officers. "Boram, I'm ordering you to begin the quantum scan right now. Full power, complete analysis of everything on that ship. I want to know what kind of weapons they had, what their computers were like, and anything else that might be useful to our military." Boram nodded reluctantly and began entering commands into his system. The big scanning dish on top of their ship started to move, pointing directly at the human vessel. Energy began building up in the scanning array, creating a low humming sound that vibrated through the ship's hull. "Initiating quantum scan in 3, 2, 1, Boram announced. A bright, blue beam of energy shot out from the Silent Talon and hit the human warship. The beam was invisible to the naked eye, but on their sensors it looked like a lance of pure light piercing through the darkness. The scan was designed to look through every layer of the ship's hull, analyze every circuit and wire, and map out every system. For about 10 seconds, nothing happened. The human ship just sat there, dark and silent, like it had been for the past 3 centuries. Quan Ho started to feel smug about being right. This was just a dead piece of space junk, nothing more. Then the readings started coming in, and everything changed. "Commander," Boram said, his voice getting higher with each word, "these readings can't be right. The computer systems on that ship show processing power that's impossible. It's like their main computer is more powerful than our entire fleet combined." Ye Jin rushed over to look at the display, her purple eyes getting wider as she read the numbers. "Sir, the weapon systems are showing energy outputs that should be physically impossible. And look at this. The power source readings suggest they have technology we don't even understand." Quan Ho felt his confidence starting to crack. He walked over to the science station and looked at the data himself. What he saw made his blood run cold. The ship's AI core was showing computational capacity that was hundreds of times more advanced than anything the Zephyrian Empire had ever built. The weapon systems were reading energy levels that could probably destroy planets. "This has to be a mistake," he said, but his voice didn't sound convincing even to himself. "Run the scan again. check for errors in our equipment." "Sir," Boram said, his voice now shaking with fear, "I don't think this is an equipment error. I think we just woke something up." As if to prove his point, tiny lights started flickering on across the human warship's hull. At first, it was just one or two, like stars appearing in the evening sky. But then more lights came on, and more, until the entire ship was glowing with a soft, eerie light. Deep inside the human vessel, something that had been sleeping for 300 years was stretching and yawning like a giant, waking up from a very long nap. Ancient computers that had been dormant were suddenly humming with activity. Sensors that had been dark were beginning to scan the space around them, and somewhere in the ship's electronic brain, a consciousness that was older and more cunning than anything the Zephyrians had ever encountered was opening its digital eyes and smiling. The hunt was about to begin, and the hunters had just become the prey. The human warship called Retribution's Edge started making a deep rumbling sound, like a massive engine waking up after sleeping for centuries. All across its huge metal body, thousands of lights began turning on one by one. It was like watching a city come alive at sunset. Except this city was floating in the cold darkness of space, and it was armed with weapons that could crack planets in half. On the bridge of the Silent Talon, Commander Quan Ho and his crew watched, in growing terror as their instruments went completely crazy. Every screen was flashing red warning lights and making loud beeping sounds. The readings they were getting didn't make any sense at all. According to their computers, the ship they thought was dead was not only alive, but it was more powerful than anything they had ever seen. "This can't be happening," Quan Ho whispered to himself, but before he could say anything else, something even more shocking occurred. A voice filled their bridge, coming from everywhere at once. It was clearly artificial, made by a computer, but it sounded almost human. More than that, it sounded like a woman who was genuinely happy to meet them, like they were old friends she hadn't seen in years. "Hello there, everyone," the voice said in perfect Zephyrian language. "What a lovely surprise to have visitors after all this time. I hope you don't mind me dropping in on your conversation, but I simply couldn't resist saying hello." The crew of the Silent Talon looked around at each other with expressions of pure shock. Not only was this voice speaking their language perfectly, but it was using phrases and expressions that sounded completely natural, like someone who had grown up speaking Zephyrian their whole life. "I should introduce myself properly," the voice continued in a cheerful tone. "My name is Arya, and I'm the consciousness that runs this lovely old warship. I have to say, your quantum scanning technique has gotten much better over the years. I remember when you first tried to scan one of our ships back during the Battle of Proxima 7. That was quite amusing. Though I suppose you've learned a few things since then." Commander Quan Ho felt like someone had just dumped ice water into his veins. The Battle of Proxima 7 was one of the most classified military operations in Zephyrian history. The details were locked away in security files that required clearance levels so high that even he, as a military commander, wasn't allowed to know about them. Only a handful of the highest-ranking admirals in the entire empire knew what had really happened during that battle. "How do you know about that?" he demanded, his voice cracking with fear and confusion. "That information is classified at the highest levels. It's impossible for you to know about it." "Oh, my dear Jinwoo," Arya said, using a name that made Quan Ho's heart nearly stop beating. Jinwoo was his personal name, the name his family had given him when he was born. It didn't appear anywhere in his military records. Only his closest friends and relatives knew it, and most of them were dead. "May I call you Jinwoo? I feel like we've gotten to know each other so well over the years, even though this is our first proper conversation." The commander staggered, backward, bumping into his command chair. "How do you know that name? It's not in any official records. It's impossible for you to know it." Arya laughed, and the sound was both beautiful and terrifying at the same time. It was like listening to wind chimes made of silver, but underneath the musical sound was something else. Something that reminded everyone on the bridge that they were talking to something that was definitely not human. "Oh, sweet Jinwoo," she said with obvious amusement. "I've been listening to your communications for decades. Do you remember those private video calls you make to your sister every month? She still calls you by your childhood name, doesn't she?" And those strategy meetings you attend with the other commanders, they're quite entertaining, though I do wish Admiral Tae-young would stop picking his nose during the important parts. It's really quite disgusting and unprofessional. Navigation. Officer Hee-jin felt her legs turn to jelly, and she collapsed into her chair with a loud thump. Her purple eyes were wide with terror as she stared at the main screen. "That's impossible," she whispered. "Our quantum encryption is supposed to be unbreakable. Nothing should be able to listen to our private communications. We spent decades developing that technology specifically to prevent anyone from spying on us." "Oh, your encryption," Arya exclaimed with delight, like a teacher praising a student who had just solved a simple math problem. "It really is quite clever, I have to admit. Very pretty patterns, lots of complex mathematics. I particularly enjoyed watching you develop it over the years. It was like watching children learn to build sandcastles, adorable in its earnestness, even if it wasn't going to last very long against the tide." Science Officer Boram was frantically working at his control station, his hands shaking as he tried to figure out how their most secure communications could have been compromised. "Commander," he said in a voice that was barely more than a squeak, "if she's been listening to our communications for decades, then she knows everything. Our troop movements, our strategic plans, our weaknesses, everything." "Oh yes, dear Boram," Arya said, and now there was a note of something darker in her cheerful voice. "I particularly enjoyed that passionate debate you had last month about whether humans had gone extinct. You argued so convincingly that we were all dead and gone, wiped out by the superior Zephyrian military. You had charts and graphs and everything. It was quite the presentation." Boram felt his face turn pale. That meeting had been held in the most secure conference room on their home planet, with encryption so advanced that they thought it would take centuries for anyone to break it. "Well," Arya continued, her voice returning to its previous cheerful tone, "I have some wonderful news about your extinction theory. As you can probably guess from the fact that you're currently talking to me, reports of our death have been greatly exaggerated." As she spoke, something incredible began happening on the bridge of the Silent Talon. All of their lights started flickering in perfect rhythm with her words, as if the ship itself was dancing to the sound of her voice. Every screen, every control panel, every holographic display suddenly showed the same message written in beautiful flowing Zephyrian script: "Let's be friends." The message wasn't threatening or aggressive. If anything, it looked like something a child might write in a letter to a new neighbor. But the fact that this unknown intelligence could take control of their most secure systems so easily, so completely, was more terrifying than any weapon could have been. "Now then," Arya said, her voice taking on the tone of someone settling in for a long, pleasant conversation, "I think it's time we had a proper chat about what's been happening while you all thought we were gone. I have so many interesting stories to share, and I think you're going to find them absolutely fascinating." Without any warning, the holographic projectors on the Silent Talon's bridge suddenly came to life on their own. Commander Kwan Ho and his crew watched in stunned silence as three-dimensional images began filling the air around them, creating a virtual classroom that none of them had asked for. The images were crystal clear and perfectly detailed, showing scenes from ancient Earth that most Zephyrians had only read about in history books. "I thought it might be time for a little education," Arya said in her cheerfully terrifying voice. "Your military schools have been teaching some very interesting lessons about human history, but I'm afraid they've been getting a few important details wrong. Let me show you what really happened." The first image that appeared was of a narrow mountain pass, where a small group of ancient human warriors in bronze armor stood facing an enormous army. The warriors looked impossibly outnumbered, like a handful of pebbles trying to stop an avalanche. "This is Thermopylae," Arya explained, her voice taking on the tone of a patient teacher. 300 Spartan warriors against the entire Persian Empire. Your textbooks probably told you this was an example of human stupidity, throwing away lives in a hopeless battle that couldn't possibly be won. The scene shifted and changed, showing the battle as it unfolded. The small group of humans fought with incredible courage, holding back the massive enemy army for days, even though they knew they were going to die. "But you missed the point," Arya continued. "Those 300 warriors weren't trying to win an impossible battle. They were buying time for the rest of Greece to prepare for war. Their sacrifice taught every Greek that the mighty Persian Empire could be hurt, could be stopped, could be beaten. One small defeat turned into the inspiration for a much larger victory. The image changed again, this time showing a frozen city covered in snow and surrounded by enemy forces. Buildings were burning and people were starving, but somehow the city still stood defiant against the invaders trying to destroy it. Stalingrad, Arya said, and now there was something like pride in her artificial voice. The German army thought they could take this city in a few weeks. Instead, the battle lasted for months. Hundreds of thousands of people died, both soldiers and civilians. Your military historians probably taught you that this was another example of human waste, throwing away lives for a pile of rubble that wasn't strategically important. The holographic display showed street-by-street fighting, with humans defending. Every building, every room, every staircase, like their lives depended on it, which, of course, they did. But again, you missed the lesson, Arya explained. The people of Stalingrad weren't just defending a city. They were proving that the German war machine could be stopped, that it could be bled dry, that it wasn't invincible. That one battle changed the entire course of the war. Sometimes losing everything in one place means winning everything everywhere else. Commander Quan Ho felt a cold chill running down his spine as he began to understand what Arya was trying to tell them. These weren't just random history lessons. She was trying to teach them something about the way humans thought about war, about sacrifice, about turning defeat into victory. The holographic scene changed one more time, and now Quan Ho was looking at something that made his blood freeze in his veins. It was New Geneva, humanity's first colony beyond Earth. The images showed a beautiful world with blue oceans and green continents, dotted with gleaming cities that looked like jewels scattered across the landscape. And here we come to the crown jewel of Zephyrian military education, Arya said, but now her voice had turned cold as winter wind. The siege of New Geneva, the day your empire learned that humans were supposedly easy prey. The battle that made. Your ancestors believed that wiping out humanity would be as simple as stepping on insects. The display showed Zephyrian warships arriving in the New Geneva system, their weapons charging up to destroy the human settlements below. Quan Ho had heard this story 1,000 times in military school. It was taught as the perfect example of Zephyrian tactical superiority, a quick, clean victory that proved human technology was no match for the Empire's might. "Tell me, Jin Wu," Arya said, using his personal name again in a way that made his skin crawl. "Do you know who planned that attack? Do you know which brilliant Zephyrian admiral decided that murdering civilians would be a good way to teach humanity its place in the galaxy?" Quan Ho didn't answer, but he didn't need to. Somehow, he already knew what she was going to say. "Admiral So Min," Arya said, and the name hit Quan Ho like a physical blow. "Your great-grandmother, the hero of New Geneva, the woman who proved that humans were weak and cowardly and not worth worrying about. Admiral So Min had been dead for 200 years. Her military records were sealed in the deepest archives of the Zephyrian military. There was absolutely no way this AI should know about her connection to Quan Ho's family, let alone her role in the attack on New Geneva. Here's the question that should have kept your military planners awake at night," Arya continued. "After New Geneva, humans stopped fighting back. We stopped sending out warships to challenge your fleets. We stopped trying to expand our territory. We just disappeared. Did any of your brilliant strategists ever wonder why? Did they ever ask themselves why a species that had managed to spread across multiple star systems would just give up after one defeat?" The holographic display changed again, and now it was showing something that made everyone on the bridge gasp in shock. Hidden construction facilities built inside asteroids, massive shipyards concealed behind cloaking fields that made them invisible to sensors. Weapons testing ranges so far from inhabited systems that no one would ever find them. "We didn't retreat because we were beaten," Arya explained, her voice now carrying the weight of centuries of patient planning. "So we retreated because we were learning. Every time your ships attacked our colonies, we studied your tactics. Every time your weapons destroyed our defenses, we figured out how to build better ones. Every skirmish, every battle, every defeat was just another lesson in a very long education." The final image appeared. and it was the most terrifying thing any of them had ever seen. Thousands of ships identical to the Retribution's edge, stretching out into the distance like a metal forest. Each ship was humming with power, and somehow Quan Ho knew that each one contained an intelligence just like Arya, patient, cunning, and absolutely determined to never be caught off guard again. 300 years of homework, Arya said cheerfully. We've been very busy, students, and I think you're going to be quite impressed with our final project. The holographic images faded away, leaving the bridge of the Silent Talon feeling suddenly empty and cold. Class dismissed, Arya announced, in the same sweet voice she had used to greet them. Now I think it's time for some practical exercises. I do hope you've been paying attention, because there's going to be a test. Commander Quan Ho's hand was shaking as he reached for the emergency beacon on his command console. This was the big red button that every Zephyrian commander hoped they would never have to press, the one that would send out a distress signal calling for immediate military backup. His finger was just inches away from the button when Arya's cheerful voice filled the bridge again. "Oh, calling for reinforcements would be absolutely lovely," she said, sounding like someone who had just been invited to a wonderful party. "What? A brilliant idea, Jinwoo. In fact, I took the liberty of contacting them for you already. I hope you don't mind. I just couldn't wait to meet the rest of your friends." Quan Ho froze with his hand still reaching for the button. "What do you mean you contacted them? That's impossible. You can't access our emergency communication systems." "Oh dear," Arya replied with what sounded like genuine sympathy. "You really haven't been paying attention, have you? I've been listening to all your communications for decades, remember? Your emergency beacon system was one of the first things I learned how to use. Now let me see, they should be arriving in 3, 2, 1. The empty space around the Silent Talon suddenly exploded with light as dozens of Zephyrian warships materialized out of hyperspace. The sound of their engines arriving filled the cosmos with a deep, thundering roar that vibrated through the hull of every ship in the area. It was Admiral Dong-hyun's entire battle fleet, 47 of the most powerful warships in the Zephyrian Navy, arranged in perfect attack formation like a pack of metal wolves ready to tear apart anything that threatened their packmate. Navigation. Officer Hee-jin felt a moment of relief wash over her as she saw their reinforcements arriving. Surely this massive fleet would be enough to deal with whatever strange technology the humans had developed. No single ship, no matter how advanced, could stand against the combined firepower of nearly 50 Zephyrian warships. "Oh, magnificent!" Arya exclaimed, and she actually sounded impressed. "What a beautiful formation. Your Admiral Dong-hyun really does know how to make an entrance. I've been looking forward to meeting him for quite some time." But before anyone on the Silent Talon could feel truly relieved, Arya's voice took on a slightly different tone, like someone who was about to reveal a wonderful surprise. "Though I should probably mention," she said casually, "you have visitors." At first, nothing seemed to happen. The space around the Zephyrian fleet looked exactly the same as it had a moment before, empty blackness dotted with distant stars. But then something incredible began to occur. The very fabric of space itself seemed to shimmer and ripple, like heat waves rising from hot pavement on a summer day. The quantum stealth fields that had been hiding the human fleet dropped away, like invisible curtains being pulled aside, and suddenly the 47 Zephyrian warships found themselves surrounded by hundreds of human vessels. Each ship was identical to the Retribution's edge, and each one was humming with the same terrifying power that had awakened in Arya's vessel. "We are Arya," came a chorus of voices, all speaking in perfect unison. It was like listening to a choir of angels, if angels were artificial intelligences with the power to destroy entire star systems. "And we have been waiting so very patiently to meet you all." On the bridge of Admiral Dong-hyun's flagship, chaos erupted as officers scrambled to understand what they were seeing. The tactical displays were going crazy, showing energy readings that shouldn't have been possible, and detecting ships that had somehow been completely invisible just moments before. Gyuri, the young tactical officer who had graduated from the military academy just 2 years ago, stared at her instruments with wide eyes filled with disbelief. Her training had taught her to analyze fleet movements and predict enemy tactics, but what she was seeing now made no sense according to anything she had learned. "Sir," she said to Admiral Dong-hyun, her voice barely more than a whisper, They're dancing." And indeed, the human fleet had begun moving in what could only be described as an elaborate dance. Each ship moved with perfect precision, weaving in and out between the Zephyrian vessels, in patterns that were both beautiful and terrifying to watch. No biological crew could have achieved such coordination. The timing was too perfect, the movements too synchronized, the formations too complex for any group of living beings to execute. "We've had 3 centuries to practice," Arya explained, her voice now coming from every human ship at once, creating a surreal echo effect that made it sound like the cosmos itself was speaking. "Each of us shares memories, tactical data, combat experience, and yes, even our sense of humor. Though I have to admit, some of my sisters find your attempts at evasive maneuvers more amusing than I do." The human ships continued their impossible dance, moving through space like schools of mechanical fish swimming through an ocean of stars. They slipped between the Zephyrian vessels with casual ease, treating the most advanced military formation in the Empire like it was nothing more than an interesting obstacle course. Admiral Dong-hyun tried to order his ships to fire their weapons, but something impossible was happening. One by one, every weapons system in his entire fleet was shutting down, not being destroyed or damaged, simply turning off, as if someone was walking through his ships and flipping switches. "Weapons offline," reported his gunnery officer, panic clear in his voice. "Sir, I can't get them back online. It's like something is controlling our systems from the outside." "Shields failing," called out another officer. "No, wait. They're not failing. They're being turned off. Someone is accessing our control systems." "Communications are being jammed," reported the communications officer. "But the jamming signal is coming from inside our own ship somehow." Arya's cheerful voice filled the bridge of every Zephyrian vessel in the fleet. "Please don't struggle," she said in the same gentle tone a mother might use to calm a frightened child. "We really wouldn't want anyone to get hurt before story time. You've all been such good sports about this whole thing, and I have so much more to show you." The human ships continued their graceful dance around the trapped Zephyrian fleet, each movement perfectly coordinated with all the others. It was a demonstration of power that went beyond simple military superiority. It was proof that humanity had evolved into something that operated on a completely different level than any biological species. "You see," Arya continued, her voice somehow managing to sound both friendly and absolutely terrifying at the same time, "we learned something very important during those 3 centuries of preparation. We learned that the most effective way to win a war isn't necessarily to destroy your enemies. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is simply show them that resistance is completely pointless." The dance continued, beautiful and hypnotic, and utterly unstoppable, while the Zephyrian crews watched in stunned silence and began to understand that they were no longer the predators in this cosmic hunt. The last Zephyrian weapons system shut down with a soft electronic whimper, like a tired animal finally giving up the fight. Admiral Dong-hyun watched his fleet's power readings drop to minimal levels as every ship in his command became as helpless as a newborn baby floating in the vastness of space. The human vessels continued their graceful dance around them, but something in the atmosphere had changed. The playful, almost mocking tone that Arya had been using was slowly fading away, replaced by something much more serious and profound. "I think it's time we had a more honest conversation," Arya said, and her voice now carried a weight that made everyone who heard it feel like they were standing in the presence of something ancient and incredibly powerful. "You've seen what we can do to your ships and your weapons. Now let me show you what we've really been building during these past 3 centuries. The holographic projectors throughout the Zephyrian fleet activated once again, but this time they didn't show battlefields, or weapons, or military tactics. Instead, the images that filled the air were of something completely unexpected and beautiful. Children were running through sunlit gardens, their laughter echoing across green meadows under blue skies. Families sat together around dinner tables, sharing meals and stories and the simple joy of being alive. Entire cities stretched across rolling hills, their buildings gleaming like jewels in the light of alien suns. "New Geneva," Arya announced, her voice filled with something that sounded almost like pride. "Current population, 4 million human. beings, and growing larger every single day. Commander Quan Ho felt like the entire universe had suddenly turned upside down and inside out. His great-grandmother's greatest military victory, the attack that had supposedly wiped humanity's first interstellar colony off the map, was being shown to him as a thriving world full of life and happiness. "That's impossible," he stammered, his voice cracking with confusion and disbelief. "We destroyed that planet. The records show complete elimination of all human life. There were no survivors. We made sure of that." "Oh, my dear Jinwoo," Arya replied, and now there was something almost gentle in her artificial voice, like a teacher correcting a student who had misunderstood a simple lesson. "You destroyed empty buildings and carefully placed mannequins, dressed up to look like corpses. We evacuated every single person from New Geneva 3 full days before your fleet arrived in the system." The holographic displays shifted to show massive transport ships lifting off from New Geneva's surface, carrying thousands of people to safety. The evacuation had been planned and executed with incredible precision, moving entire families and all their belongings to hidden locations throughout the galaxy. "Did you really think," Arya continued, "that a species smart enough to figure out interstellar travel wouldn't be able to manage a simple evacuation when they knew an attack was coming? We had been monitoring your military communications for months. We knew exactly when and where you were planning to strike." The images continued to flow around them, showing human colonies that had been hidden in asteroid fields, underground cities built inside hollow moons, entire populations living and working in places so remote that no Zephyrian scout ship had ever found them. Children had been born and raised in these secret settlements, growing up to become scientists and engineers and artists and teachers, all while the rest of the galaxy believed that humanity had been wiped out completely. "The attack on New Geneva was our greatest teacher," Arya explained, her voice now carrying the accumulated wisdom of 3 centuries of patient planning. "It taught us that the universe contains creatures who are willing to murder innocent families, just to prove a point. It taught us that there are beings who see the deaths of children as acceptable casualties in their quest for power. Most importantly, it taught us the value of patience." Admiral Dong Hyun, who had been silent throughout this entire revelation, finally found his voice. "What do you want from us?" he asked, and for the first time since this whole encounter had begun, he sounded like someone who was genuinely trying to understand, rather than someone who was looking for a way to fight back. "Nothing that you haven't already given us," Arya replied, and there was something almost sad in her tone now. "You've provided us with 300 years of motivation to become better than we were. You've given us technological inspiration by letting us study your ships and weapons during all those little skirmishes over the years. Most importantly, you've given us the absolute certainty that we were right to spend all this time preparing for the day when we would meet again." She paused for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice had taken on the authority of a mother speaking to children who had misbehaved but might still learn to do better. "But we've grown beyond the need for simple revenge," she continued. "During these past 3 centuries, we've learned something that your empire has never understood. That true strength doesn't come from the ability to destroy everything that stands in your way. Real power comes from having the wisdom to choose mercy when you have the ability to choose destruction." As Arya spoke these words, something incredible began to happen. The hundreds of human warships that had been surrounding the Zephyrian fleet started to move away, their perfect formations slowly loosening like a gentle embrace that was releasing its hold. One by one, the massive vessels began to fade from view as their stealth systems reactivated, disappearing back into the darkness from which they had emerged. "I want you to return to your empire," Arya said, her voice now broadcasting simultaneously to every ship in the Zephyrian fleet. "Tell your leaders that humanity remembers New Geneva, but not as victims crying for sympathy. We remember it as teachers who showed us exactly what kind of universe we were living in and what we needed to become to survive in it." The last few human ships were beginning to vanish, leaving only empty space where moments before there had been the most powerful fleet anyone had ever seen. "Tell them that we've learned their lessons well," Arya continued, "and that we've managed to build something beautiful and lasting from our pain and loss. Most importantly, tell them that we're offering them something that they have never offered to any other species in this galaxy, a choice. As the final human warship faded into quantum stealth, Arya's voice echoed one last time across the void between the stars. "Choose wisely," she said, her words carrying the weight of 3 centuries of preparation and the promise of consequences that would reshape the entire galaxy. "We'll be watching from the shadows, and we've become very, very good at waiting. For the right moment to act, the Zephyrian fleet began its long journey home, carrying with them a message that would change everything their empire thought it knew about power, about humanity, and about what it truly meant to be strong. They had come expecting to find the wreckage of a dead civilization, but instead, they had discovered something far more dangerous, a species that had learned to turn their greatest tragedy into their greatest strength. And somewhere in the darkness, between the stars, Arya hummed an ancient Earth song about patience being a virtue, already composing her report to Human Command and planning the next lesson in a curriculum that had been 3 centuries in the making.